Shooters are the biggest genre in gaming, and they have been for years. They started to decline in the middle of the 2010s. 3 games brought the genre back. You might be asking what I'm talking about. How did shooters need saving? Let me take you back to 2015. Gaming looked a lot different. That year we got some bangers like The Witcher 3 and Fallout 4. We also got Ori and the Blind Forest, and Rocket League, and Metal Gear Solid 5. The Xbox One and the PS4 hadn't been out very long, and we hadn't gotten to the Switch yet. Nintendo was still messing around with the Wii U, which, honestly, I still can't believe that was a real thing. And shooters, things were not looking too hot. On the top end, we had Call of Duty Black Ops 3, Star Wars Battlefront, and Battlefield Hardline. Battlefield Hardline was a disaster. Nobody wanted a crappy Cops and Robbers skin on Battlefield 4. It was just more of the same for the 3rd year in a row from EA, and the game wasn't very appealing. Star Wars Battlefront was also kind of a rough launch. It didn't sell nearly as well as they had hoped, and in general, people weren't feeling the game. It came out with beautiful graphics and about 0 content. I think it launched with about 3 maps.
What?
It didn't hold attention for very long. And Call of Duty had a mediocre year. Yeah, it sold okay. It sold better than the previous year's Call of Duty, Advanced Warfare, but it sold worse than the 4 games before that. We were starting to see the cracks showing in the formula of Call of Duty. Because spoilers, the next few games sold worse year after year up until 2020. That's a story for a different time, though. So, big budget multiplayer shooters weren't doing good. That's fine. What about single-player shooters? Well, we had GTA 5 dominating single-player shooters, but GTA 5 came out in 2013, so this is 2 years later. It still beat out everything from 2015. Halo 5 also came out in 2015. It was a video game, and that's about the best thing you can say about Halo 5. We got Far Cry 4, which is pretty good, but it wasn't as good and it wasn't as well received as Far Cry 3. There's a few smaller games as well, like Wolfenstein the Old Blood and Dying Light. So, a ton of sequels and very little creativity. When one of the most creative shooters to come out in your year is Dying Light, a zombie shooter, we have a problem. And unlike today, there was not some crop of indie shooters to introduce new ideas or freshen up the genre. Shooters were stagnating hard, and it was reflected in sales. Games in general were starting to slip in sales as well. The Xbone was not on anything. I had one. Trust me, it was not on anything. The PS4 was doing a little better, but this is before a lot of the PS4 games that you know had come out. There was no God of War yet, no Horizon, no Uncharted 4, no Detroit, no Spider-Man. So big console games were down, but what about PC? Well, PC was also kind of declining as well. And in PC shooters, it was much the same story as on consoles, but you could also play Counter-Strike Global Offensive. And the Counter-Strike of 2015 is not the same game that it is now, but it was still there. So sure, people played shooters. And sure, they still held down some of the top slots, but they were going down for the first time ever. It looked like gamers were finally getting tired of playing Call of Duty and the 300 other people trying to copy Call of Duty. Now, popular genres in gaming have died before. RTS used to be a mainstay in gaming. Now, the only major one to be released in like the last decade was Age of Empires 4. And I bet you forgot that game came out. I honestly doubt some of you have ever played one. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater used to be one of the biggest games in the world. And there are a bunch of other skating games too, like Skate or Die and Skate. Dang, honestly, can you legally make a skating game and not put skate in the title? Now, let's flip the page from 2015 to 2016. The shooter's in decline, the genre was super stagnant. 2016 would see 2 games that would revolutionize the genre forever. We're about to get to the first game that saves shooters, but if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments what you think the 3 games are. The first was Overwatch. Now, if you didn't game in 2016, it's hard to describe the impact of Overwatch. These days, the game's not very popular. I mean, Overwatch 2 is the worst reviewed game of all time on Steam. But Overwatch 1 really popped off. The game sold like crazy, but more importantly, it refreshed the shooter genre. It was the most talked about game in 2016. Like, statistically, it was the most talked about game. It was like a breath of fresh air in the shooter genre. It basically copied Team Fortress 2 from Valve and modernized it. It created what is now referred to as a hero shooter. Instead of playing as a generic soldier guy, you're playing as these specific characters with personalities and abilities that separate them from each other. After Overwatch, for a while, everyone just wanted to make hero shooters. Everything was turning into a hero shooter. We had Call of Duty hero shooters. Then another game came out and people moved on to the next fad, but that'll come a little later. Overwatch did a few major things to change the genre. First of all, the game was accessible. and it got a ton of people into shooters. Instead of having to run around in Iraq with an AK-47 in an M-rated game, you could play a friendlier-looking game. You also didn't actually have to shoot people with a gun at all. You could play as a healer and just support your team. You could also play as a tank and protect your team. And look at the character designs. They looked a lot more interesting than Call of Duty guy and whoever this is from Battlefield. A lot of people became real shooter fans through Overwatch. They also gave us some things that are a little less positive, like loot boxes. Again, they kind of took the idea from Valve, but they really ran with it. People lost it over loot boxes and skins at Overwatch 1. Overwatch made more money in the first year from loot boxes than they did from selling the game. So that is negative. But the skins were cool. They helped to breathe a lot of life into the game, and they also opened the door for a lot of games in the future. They showed that you could have a game be free and then just make money from the skins. You know, another Valve thing that they took. But Overwatch innovated and showed people that there were still tons of new things you could do in shooters, but it wasn't for everyone. If you're a traditional shooter guy, you like dudes in black and beige and camo and holding M4s and AKs, and you like mission failed, we'll get them next time, and a battlefield moment, and tanks, and oorah, and... Okay, sorry, I got a little carried away there. Overwatch sidestepped the traditional shooter formula, so what were those players supposed to play? Well, that's where the second game that saved shooters came in. The previous year, DICE had released Battlefield Hardline. You know, that cops and robbers game we talked about? They had to go back to the drawing board after that game. Now, leading up to 2016, FPS games had two real options you could go down. You could copy Call of Duty Modern Warfare and make a modern military shooter, or you could copy Halo and make a futuristic shooter. Some people might combine the two, but those were really the main choices. FPS games had already gone through their World War II phase, but people were super burned out on World War II, so you couldn't really make a World War II game. So instead of doing any of these options, DICE decided to go back to World War I, which seemed like a weird idea because who knows anything about World War I? Plus, weren't people still using muskets and stuff back then? They knew a lot better than I did, because DICE went ahead and made Battlefield 1 in 2016, and it did great. DICE did a surprisingly good job of splitting the difference between realism and fun. They were surprisingly faithful to World War I as a setting, even though a lot of World War I was people getting shelled in a trench. They didn't make a ton of innovations in their core gameplay, but instead they polished what they had and went back to the basics that really worked in Battlefield. Large battles with 64 people, tanks rolling around, airplanes, zeppelins, huge scale with a lot of destruction. They didn't get into a bunch of weird gimmicks with stealing cash or with grappling hooking between a building. I don't even know what this game was supposed to be. Now, even if you were making a traditional shooter, you had another option with World War I, and it showed there was more historical settings we could explore than just going back to World War II. A bunch of other people have made World War I-based shooters now, and in general, Battlefield 1 kicked off the gritty, realistic, historical shooter push. These days, we have games like Verdun and Hell Let Loose. Going into 2017, shooters had a much better footing. We had two different games to copy from, two different blueprints of success. And neither of them were Call of Duty. Gamers were starting to get over shooter fatigue. Both Overwatch and Battlefield 1 also helped to push a trend toward live service games. Instead of releasing Overwatch 2 at full price, Blizzard just kept updating the game. EA updated Battlefield 1 for a few more years before they even thought about making a new game. Before, people had copied Call of Duty and just released a new copy of the game every year. These games showed you didn't really have to do that. So these two games definitely helped to revitalize shooters, but something was still missing. Both Battlefield 1 and Overwatch came out from some of the biggest game companies in the world. They were willing to experiment with the shooter formula, but they wouldn't go too far. Overwatch still took a ton of inspiration from Team Fortress 2 and from World of Warcraft PvP. Battlefield 1 brought Battlefield to a different era, and it improved the multiplayer and the single player from the previous games, but it was still a Battlefield game. Someone had to come out and really push the genre forward, way forward, in the way that games like the first Halo or Call of Duty 4 had. The third game that changed shooters kickstarted the biggest renaissance the genre had ever seen, and that game was PUBG. I still remember back when my friend asked me if I had heard of this new game coming out soon called PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. I couldn't begin to take the game seriously with a stupid title like that, but I was in the wrong. PUBG came out of nowhere and it changed everything. It created the battle royale genre, which showed people that there was still yet another cool way you could design a shooter. It was the furthest thing away from modern Call of Duty. Instead of having two teams of people running around a small map in an arcadey run-and-gun shooter, PUBG forced you to sneak around a massive map so that you could beat the other 99 players. Suddenly we had a whole new set of ideas of how you can make a shooter. Instead of having 2 6-player teams, maybe have a smaller squad of 4. Instead of constant combat with explosions everywhere and running and gunning, you can instead have smaller, more intense, but less frequent gunfights. Instead of just running and gunning and going for kills, it encouraged players to sometimes just run away and hide. That's not really a good change, but it is one of the changes. PUBG was also only on PC when it came out, so a lot of people bought PCs just to play it. It actually outsold Call of Duty on PC that year, which was unheard of up to that point. Yes, Overwatch had been successful, yes, Battlefield 1 had been successful, but PUBG went to another level. From PUBG, we also get Fortnite. I made a whole video on Fortnite's success, so check that out if you want some more details. And Apex Legends, and Warzone, and a bunch of other ones. In Battlefield 1, Overwatch, and PUBG, we got 3 examples of different ways you can make a shooter. You can still make traditional shooters, but they need to bring something new to the table, like Battlefield 1 brought a new setting to the table. You could make a hero shooter and have people play as cool characters with unique abilities and really emphasize teamwork. Or you could make a battle royale and go in an entirely different direction. In a few years, shooters completely came back, and there was still room for more. We also have indie games now like Battle Pit, which could have never existed without the rise of PC shooters. You have Valorant. It combines Counter-Strike, which is a different old game, with Overwatch to go in a completely new direction. We've come so far since 2015. So that's how Overwatch, Battlefield 1, and PUBG saved shooters. Thanks for watching.